The candles in Lord Gareth Ashfeld's great hall flickered as if sensing the cruelty of the words being spoken. Elanor stood in the center of the stone chamber, her hands clasped tightly before her to hide their trembling. The velvet of her forest green gown, too tight across her generous figure despite the seamstress's best efforts, caught the firelight as she took shallow breaths. The autumn wind howled beyond the thick walls of Greymoor, as if mourning what was to come. "It is decided," her father announced, his voice carrying the finality of an executioner's blade. "You will be sent to the elven prince's domain at first light." Eleanor's younger sisters exchanged glances from their seats at the long oak table, a mixture of relief and genuine pity in their eyes. Cecilia and Rosalind were the beautiful ones, slender as willow branches, golden-haired, obedient, perfectly groomed for advantageous marriages to neighboring lords. Elanor had always been the disappointment, too round, too bookish, too questioning of her father's iron rule over Greymoor's grey lands. "Father," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "this alliance can be maintained through trade agreements, through tribute of gold and manuscripts. The Tratado de Ithildin has never required." Lord Gareth slammed his fist against the carved armrest of his chair. The goblets on the table jumped, spilling crimson wine that looked too much like blood in the dim firelight. "The elven prince has demanded tribute, and I have chosen you. Consider yourself fortunate I found a use for you at all." Lady Cordelia, Eleanor's stepmother, didn't even look up from her embroidery. "It is a noble sacrifice, Elanor. Your father's standing with the king is precarious. This gesture will ease tensions with the immortal folk of the north." The immortal folk. As if Prince Thalionor and his kind were mere creatures of legend, rather than the Eldar who had walked these lands since the Second Era. Elanor had read the ancient texts in Greymoor's dusty library, texts her father had long forgotten existed. She knew the stories of Aravanthir, the twilight kingdom hidden in the Montañas Prateadas, where the last of the great elven houses dwelt in their ageless halls. The Tratado de Ithildin, signed 500 years ago when the Eldar had saved humanity from the orc hordes, required annual tribute, gold, silver, wine, illuminated manuscripts. Never lives, never human flesh offered like chattel. "May I at least gather my possessions?" Elanor asked, fighting to keep what dignity remained to her. Her father waved dismissively. "Take what fits in one chest. Nothing of value. It would be wasted on you, and the elven prince has no need for mortal trinkets." In her chambers, high in Greymoor's eastern tower, Elanor moved mechanically. Into the iron-bound chest went her warmest cloaks, her simplest dresses, and hidden beneath them, the books she treasured most. Ancient texts on the Primera Era, treatises on the lost languages of men, a leather-bound journal where she had transcribed every rune she could decipher. If she was to die in the halls of the immortal, she would at least have her knowledge with her until the end. Briar, her lady's maid, and the only person in Greymoor who had ever shown her true kindness, wept silently as she helped pack. "My lady," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The Montañas Prateadas are treacherous even without the immortal Eldar who dwell there," Elanor supplied, a bitter smile crossing her full lips. "I've survived 19 years among the cruelty of this castle, Briar. Perhaps I'll fare better with those who don't pretend to be something they're not." When dawn broke gray and cold over Greymoor, a small procession waited in the courtyard. 6 guards in worn mail, a driver hunched against the morning chill, and the covered wagon that would take Elanor to her fate. No family members came to bid her farewell, not her sisters, not her stepmother, certainly not her father. The autumn mist clung to the stones like a funeral shroud as she climbed into the wagon, refusing the guard's offered hand. If this was to be her last journey as herself, she would make it with whatever dignity remained. The journey took 5 days, winding through increasingly desolate terrain. The fertile plains around Greymoor gave way to the Planicie de Nevoa, where fog rolled perpetually across abandoned farmsteads and forgotten villages. On the 3rd day, they began their ascent into the foothills of the arid Mithril. Elanor watched from the small window as the world she knew fell away beneath them. The guards grew more nervous with each mile, hands resting on sword hilts, eyes scanning the mist-shrouded forests. They spoke in hushed tones of the Eldar, immortal, beautiful, deadly. Some said the elves could kill with a glance, that their arrows never missed. that time itself moved differently in their halls. On the 5th day, as the sun hung low and red on the western horizon, they reached the base of the Escadas de Prata. The steps were carved from white stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light, ascending into clouds that obscured whatever lay above. "This is as far as we go," the captain of the guard announced, his weathered face tight with poorly concealed fear. "Lord Ashfeld's orders were to deliver you to the silver stairs. The Eldar will come for you." Elanor wasn't surprised. Of course, her father's men wouldn't risk themselves beyond this point. She stepped down from the wagon, straightening her travel cloak against the mountain chill. The air here was different, cleaner, sharper, carrying hints of pine and something sweeter she couldn't name. "My chest," she said simply. 2 guards hefted it down and set it at the foot of the stairs before retreating quickly to the wagon. The captain had the grace to look ashamed for a moment before turning away. "We'll be telling Lord Ashfeld you arrived safely," he said, though they both knew he meant "we'll be telling him we abandoned you." Elanor watched them go, these men who had known her since childhood, fleeing down the mountain path without a backward glance. When the wagon disappeared into the evening mist, she stood alone at the foot of the Escadas de Prata, looking up into the unknown. The ancient steps seemed to go on forever, disappearing into clouds that glowed pink and gold with the setting sun. Elanor took a deep breath, gripped the handle of her chest, and began to climb. She had ascended perhaps 200 steps when the mist around her began to shimmer. The air grew warmer, and she smelled flowers, night-blooming jasmine and something else, something that made her think of summer nights and distant music. A figure materialized from the mist ahead. Eleanor's breath caught. She had read descriptions of the Eldar, had studied illuminated manuscripts depicting their ethereal beauty, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of the woman who stood before her. She was tall and willowy, with hair like spun moonlight that fell past her waist. Her gown seemed woven from twilight itself, shifting between purple and silver with each movement. But it was her eyes that held Elanor transfixed. They were violet, the color of the sky just before full dark, and they held centuries of memory. "Lady Elanor Ashfeld of Greymoor," the woman said, her voice like wind through silver bells. "I am Miriel Felinda, guardian of Aravanthir's gates. You are expected." With a graceful gesture, Miriel lifted Eleanor's heavy chest as if it weighed nothing. "Come, the prince awaits, and the evening star has risen. It is time." Elanor followed Miriel up the remaining stairs, her mortal legs burning with effort, while the elven woman glided ahead, as if climbing through air itself. The mist grew thicker, more luminous, until Elanor could see nothing but the faint shimmer of Miriel's gown ahead. Then, as suddenly as stepping through a curtain, they emerged into clarity. Elanor stopped, her breath stolen by wonder. Before her stretched a valley of impossible beauty, bathed in the golden light of a sun that seemed suspended just above the horizon. White towers rose from living stone, their spires catching the light like captured stars. Gardens terraced down the mountainside, filled with flowers that glowed softly, golden blooms she recognized from her books as Elanor flowers, and white blossoms that shimmered like captured moonlight, the legendary Nifredil. At the valley's heart stood Calad Ost, the Fortaleza de Luz. It was not built, but grown, carved from a single vast outcropping of white stone that gleamed as if lit from within. Arched windows lined its walls, and from them spilled music, harps and voices singing in a language that made Eleanor's heart ache with longing, though she didn't understand the words. "Aravanthir," Miriel said softly, watching Eleanor's face. "The last of the great kingdoms of the Eldar in these lands. Come, mortal child. Prince Thalionor does not make his guests wait, even those sent as insults." The words were gentle but held steel beneath. Elanor looked at the elven woman sharply. "You know why I was sent." "We know many things," Miriel replied, those ancient violet eyes unreadable. "Your father's cruelty, the breaking of the Tratado de Itildin, and other things. Things perhaps you do not yet know yourself." She turned and continued down a path paved with white stones that rang softly beneath their feet. They entered Calad Ost through gates that opened without visible mechanism, and Elanor found herself in a world utterly removed from the gray stone halls of Greymoor. Here, everything sang with life and light. tapestries depicting battles and celebrations from ages past lined walls of living white stone, crystalline chandeliers, not hung but grown from the ceiling itself, captured and refracted light into rainbow patterns across polished floors. Elves moved through the halls like living poems. Some paused to watch Elanor pass with open curiosity but no malice. She heard whispers in that musical language, saw pointed glances, but felt no hostility, only interest, wonder even. "Prince Thalionor has opened the Hall of Stars for your audience," Muriel explained as they climbed a curving staircase. "It is a great honor. The hall is opened only for matters of significance." They stopped before doors of silver-white wood, inlaid with patterns that seemed to move when Elanor looked at them directly. Muriel placed one graceful hand upon the surface and spoke a word in the elven tongue. The doors swung inward silently. The Hall of Stars was aptly named. The domed ceiling was transparent crystal, revealing the night sky beyond. And what a sky it was. Stars blazed with a brilliance Elanor had never seen from Grey Moor, their light reflected and magnified by the crystal, until the entire hall glowed with soft starlight. The floor was polished stone so smooth it mirrored the ceiling, creating the illusion of standing among the stars themselves. At the hall's center stood a single figure, Prince Thalionor, last of his line, keeper of Aravanthir. Elanor had thought Muriel beautiful. She had believed she understood what elven grace meant. She was wrong. Thalionor was tall even for an elf, his frame speaking of strength that belied the elegant lines of his form. His hair was black as a raven's wing but caught the starlight with hints of deep blue, falling straight to his shoulders. His face was all elegant planes and sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that seemed carved by a master sculptor. But it was his eyes that made Elanor forget to breathe. They were amber, not the dull brown gold of mortal eyes, but liquid amber that glowed like captured fire. They held the weight of 12 centuries, ancient and young at once, and they fixed upon Elanor with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in her life. He wore robes of midnight blue, embroidered with silver thread that traced constellations across his chest and shoulders. No crown adorned his head, but power radiated from him like heat from flame. "Lady Elanor Ashfeld," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected, resonant, with an accent that made the common tongue sound like music. "Welcome to Aravanthir. I apologize for the circumstances that bring you to my halls." Elanor found her voice with effort. "Your Highness." She attempted a curtsy, though her travel-worn dress and exhausted legs made it clumsy. A slight smile touched Thalionor's lips. "Please, such formality is unnecessary. You have been grievously wronged, Lady Elanor. By your father, yes, but also by my people's agreement with yours. The Tratado de Ithildin was never meant to permit such transactions." He descended 3 steps from the small dais where he'd been standing, and Elanor realized with shock that he was walking toward her, an elven prince, immortal and powerful, approaching as if she were an equal rather than an unwanted tribute. He stopped an arm's length away, and Elanor could feel that strange coolness that emanated from him, not cold, but like standing near still water on a summer evening. He studied her face with those amber eyes, and she fought the urge to look away, to hide. "You are not what your father described in his letter," Thalionor said quietly. "And what did my father describe, Your Highness?" The words came out more bitter than she intended. Something flickered in those ancient eyes. Anger, perhaps, though not directed at her. "He called you his burden, his shame. He said you were being sent as punishment, yours and mine." The prince's jaw tightened. "He suggested that I might find you useful for menial tasks, or dispose of you as I saw fit." The words shouldn't have hurt. Elanor had heard variations of them her entire life, but to have her father's contempt laid bare before this being of terrible beauty and power burned like salt in fresh wounds. "My father," she said carefully, "has never valued what he doesn't understand." "And what, I wonder?" Thalionor asked, tilting his head slightly. "Does Lord Ashfeld fail to understand about his eldest daughter?" Elanor met those burning amber eyes directly. If this was to be her end, she would face it without cowering. "Everything, Your Highness. Everything that matters." For a long moment, silence filled the Hall of Stars. Then something extraordinary happened. Prince Thalionor smiled. Not the slight curve of lips from before, but a genuine smile that transformed his severe features into something warm, almost boyish despite his 12 centuries. "I believe," he said softly, "that you are correct." He gestured toward a door Elanor hadn't noticed before, nearly invisible against the white wall. "Come." Night falls quickly in the mountains, even eternal ones, and you must be exhausted. Your chambers have been prepared. We will speak more tomorrow, when you have rested and seen Aravanthir in daylight. He turned and walked toward the door, then paused, glancing back. "One thing more, Lady Elanor. You are not a prisoner here, regardless of your father's intentions. You are a guest under my protection, subject to the ancient laws of hospitality that even the Eldar dare not break. Do you understand?" Elanor nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Miriel will show you to your rooms. Sleep well, and welcome to Aravanthir." Miriel led Elanor through corridors that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. They passed gardens open to the night sky where flowers sang softly, truly sang, in voices like children's laughter. They crossed bridges of crystal that spanned interior courtyards where fountains played water that glowed faintly blue. "The prince spoke truly," Miriel said as they walked. "You are not a prisoner, but neither are you. Ordinary." She glanced at Elanor with those violet eyes. "He sensed it the moment you crossed the threshold. That is why he opened the Hall of Stars for your audience." "Sensed what?" Elanor asked, too exhausted to be frightened anymore. Miriel stopped before an arched doorway. "That is not my story to tell. The prince will explain if he chooses." She pushed open the door. "Your chambers, Lady Elanor. I will bring you supper within the hour. Rest." The rooms beyond stole Eleanor's breath for the third time that evening. They were larger than her entire tower chamber in Greymoor, with high ceilings painted with more stars. A fire burned in a white stone hearth, its flames silver rather than gold. Plush furnishings in shades of cream and pale blue filled the space, and tall windows looked out over the valley, now bathed in starlight. Most surprising was the bath. Not a wooden tub, but a pool set into the floor itself, already filled with steaming water scattered with white flower petals that glowed softly. Her iron-bound chest sat beside a wardrobe of pale wood that seemed grown rather than built. Elanor approached the windows, pressing her hand against glass smoother than any she'd ever seen. Below, Aravanthir spread like a dream made solid. Lights glowed in the towers, and she could hear distant singing, joyful and wild. The bath called to her aching muscles. 5 days of travel in a cramped wagon had left her body stiff and sore. She slipped out of her travel-worn dress and eased into the pool, sighing as warmth enveloped her. The water smelled of flowers and something spicy she couldn't identify, and it seemed to ease not just physical aches but deeper ones. The years of verbal barbs, of being told she was less, inadequate, shameful. She had prepared herself for horror, for pain, perhaps for death. Not for this strange, beautiful hospitality. What game was Prince Thalionor playing? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, sinking deeper into the water. Miriel returned carrying a covered tray. She set it on a low table near the fire and began laying out what looked like enough food for 3 people. "The prince thought you might be hungry after your journey." Elanor climbed from the bath, and Miriel handed her a robe of fabric softer than anything she'd ever felt. "Miriel," she asked hesitantly, "may I ask you something?" "You may ask," the elven woman replied with a slight smile. "Whether I can answer is another matter. Are you, like the others? Fully elven, I mean?" Miriel's expression became distant. "I am what we call Paradel, half-elven, born of a union between my elven father and human mother 3 centuries ago." She touched her violet eyes. "These mark me as neither one nor the other. I belong to both worlds and to neither." "I'm sorry," Elanor said softly. "Don't be. It is simply what is." Miriel moved toward the door. "Eat, Lady Elanor. Tomorrow the prince will begin your education, and you will need your strength." After Miriel left, Elanor examined the food. Roasted fowl with herbs she didn't recognize, bread still warm and lighter than air, vegetables glazed with honey, berries that seemed to glow faintly, and a crystal goblet filled with pale golden liquid. She sniffed it cautiously. Wine, but sweeter and more complex than any she'd tasted. As she ate, Eleanor's mind churned with questions. What did Thalionor sense in her? What education did she need? And why did his amber eyes seem to see past her flesh to something deeper? Sleep came fitfully that night, despite the impossibly soft bed. Elanor dreamed of stars that sang her name, of forests where the trees whispered secrets, of amber eyes that held both the weight of ages and the promise of something she dared not name. She woke to sunlight streaming through the tall windows. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't Greymoor's gray tower. This wasn't her narrow bed. Then memory returned. Aravanthir, Prince Thalionor, her father's final rejection. But with the memory came not despair, but something else. Curiosity. Wonder even. Miriel arrived shortly after Elanor rose, carrying fresh clothing. A gown of deep blue, simpler than court fashion, but made of material finer than anything she'd owned. "The prince requests your presence in the gardens of Cëor-en-Edain," she announced. "The morning is the best time to see them." Dressed and fed on pastries that tasted of honey and almonds, Elanor followed Miriel through different corridors than the previous night. Daylight revealed details hidden by darkness. Intricate mosaics on floors telling stories she didn't recognize. Sculptures in alcoves depicting elves in ancient armor. Windows of colored glass that painted rainbow patterns across walls. They descended through a series of terraced gardens, each more beautiful than the last, until they reached a garden unlike any other. Here, the trees themselves seemed alive beyond normal growing things. Their bark was silver white, their leaves every shade of green and gold. Flowers bloomed in impossible profusion, the golden Elanor, white Nephrodil, and others she had no names for. At the garden's heart stood Prince Thalionor beside a pool of water so still it looked like polished silver. He wore simpler robes today, pale gray embroidered with green, and his raven hair was pulled back, revealing the slight point of his ears. He turned as they approached, and Elanor felt that same shock of recognition, as if some part of her knew him though they'd just met. "Lady Elanor," he greeted, inclining his head. "Thank you for joining me. Miriel, that will be all." The half-elven woman bowed and departed, leaving Elanor alone with the prince. He gestured to a stone bench beside the pool. "Please sit. There is much we must discuss." Elanor obeyed, acutely aware of his proximity as he sat beside her, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his amber eyes. "You're wondering why you're here," he began. "Not in the surface sense. Your father's cruelty is obvious, but why I received you with honor rather than anger at the broken treaty. Why I have not sent you back." "Yes," Elanor admitted. Thalionor was silent for a moment, gazing at the pool. "What do you know of the early ages, Lady Elanor? Of the time before the Grande Séparation? I've read what little remains in Greymoor's library. That once, humans and elves lived in closer harmony. That there was some great sundering that divided the races." "More than divided," Thalionor said softly. "In the days before the Primera Era, there existed humans who walked beside my people as equals. They possessed gifts that have been lost. The ability to hear the songs of growing things, to shape the elements, to touch the boundary between mortality and eternity." He turned those amber eyes upon her. "We called them the Edain Laiqua, the green humans. Humanity called them the Corazón dos Primeros Homens, the Cëor-en-Edain." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with you?" Thalionor interrupted gently. "It has everything to do with you, Elanor Ashfeld. Because the moment you crossed the threshold of Aravanthir, I felt it. The same power that has not walked these halls in 10 centuries. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You carry the Cëor-en-Edain in your blood. You are descended from the first men, the bridge between our races. That is what your father sensed and feared, though he didn't understand what it was. That is why you never fit in his world." Elanor stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. That's impossible. I'm nobody. Just a failure, a disappointment. You are anything but." The intensity in Thalionor's gaze pinned her in place. "Look." He passed his hand over the still pool, and the water began to glow with soft silver light. Images formed in its depths, not reflections but memories, visions of times long past. Elanor saw humans who glowed with inner light, standing beside elves in celebration. She saw them singing to growing things, making flowers bloom out of season. She saw them wielding flames that didn't burn, shaping water into forms that defied nature. "This is your heritage," Thalionor said. "This is what sleeps in your blood, waiting to awaken." The images faded, and Elanor found herself trembling. If this is true, why now? Why didn't these powers manifest before? Because they need awakening. They need training, understanding, connection to the old ways. Thalionor rose and extended his hand. I propose a bargain, Elanor Ashfeld. Stay here for one cycle of the full moon, 30 days. Let me teach you what you are, help you awaken what your bloodline carries. In return, tell me of the mortal world as it is now. My people have grown isolated in our immortality. We have forgotten what it means to walk among those whose lives burn bright and brief. His expression softened. And at the end of 30 days, you will be free to go wherever you wish, with wealth enough to live however you choose. You will owe your father nothing, answer to no one but yourself. Elanor looked at his extended hand, elegant and powerful. This was madness, ancient bloodlines, magical powers, an elven prince offering to teach her. What? To be something other than the failure she'd always been told she was? But what did she have to lose? Return to Greymoor, to her father's contempt? Wander the world as a penniless refugee? She placed her hand in his. His skin was cooler than hers, but not cold, smooth as polished stone. I accept your bargain, Your Highness. Those amber eyes blazed with something that looked like triumph, or perhaps relief. Then we begin. And please, when we are alone, call me Thalionor. We will be spending much time together, and formality grows tiresome after a few centuries. A smile tugged at Eleanor's lips despite everything. Then you must call me Elanor. Just Elanor. Very well, just Elanor, Thalionor said with the hint of amusement. Now, let us see what you can do. The training began that very morning in the gardens of Tarelilomea. Thalionor stood behind Elanor, his presence a warmth at her back despite the coolness that naturally emanated from his elven form. Before her lay a single white flower, a nifredil bloom, placed on the flat surface of an ancient stone. All magic, Thalionor explained, his voice low and measured, begins with connection. The Cëor-en-Edain were not mages in the sense of humans who learned spellcraft. They were bridges. They felt the life in all things and joined their essence to it. He placed his hands lightly on her shoulders, and Elanor felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with temperature. Close your eyes. Breathe. Feel your heartbeat. Elanor obeyed, acutely aware of every point of contact between them. Her heart was racing. From nervousness, she told herself nothing more. Good. Now feel deeper. The blood moving through your veins, carrying life to every part of you. The breath filling your lungs. You are not separate from life, Elanor. You are made of it. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing, the steady thump of her pulse. Gradually, the world beyond her closed eyes seemed to expand. She became aware of other rhythms, the rustling of leaves in a breeze she couldn't feel, the gentle flow of water in the pool, and something else, a slow, steady pulse, like a heartbeat, but deeper, older. The tree, Thalionor murmured, as if reading her thoughts. You're feeling the Malern tree behind you. It has stood here for 3,000 years. Now reach for the flower, not with your hands, with your essence. Ask it to show you its life. It sounded mad, but Elanor focused on the flower, on that sense of expansion she'd felt. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, so faint she almost missed it, she felt something, a tiny spark of life, fragile but bright, pulsing with its own small rhythm. Her eyes flew open. I felt it. Just for a moment, but I felt. She stopped. The nifredil bloom was glowing, its white petals luminous with soft silver light. Thalionor's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. Remarkable, he breathed. It took the last Edain months to make first contact. You did it in minutes. Over the following days, the exercises intensified. Thalionor taught her to hold that feeling of connection longer, to extend it to other living things. Soon she could make flowers bloom out of season, could encourage vines to grow in patterns she directed, could even coax small flames to dance between her fingers, silver flames that gave light but no heat. But the training was only part of her days in Aravanthir. The rest was spent in wonder. Thalionor was a patient teacher, but also a surprisingly engaging companion. He showed her the great library of Caladost, a circular chamber 5 stories tall, where every wall held books and scrolls dating back millennia. He taught her phrases in Sindarin, the elven tongue, laughing at her clumsy pronunciation in a way that held no mockery, only warmth. They took meals together in a small dining room, rather than the great hall, intimate dinners where he asked about her life in Greymoor and actually listened, his amber eyes intent on her face. She told him about learning to read in secret, about teaching the kitchen maids their letters, about nights spent in the library while her sisters practiced dancing. In turn, he spoke of the weight of immortality, of watching ages pass while he remained unchanging. "You mortals," he said one evening over wine that tasted of starlight, "think immortality a gift. Sometimes it feels more like a curse. Everyone I might love will age and fade while I remain. Everyone but my own kind. And we..." He paused, pain flickering across his features. "We are fading too, leaving for the undying lands across the sea, or simply diminishing. I am the last of the House of Cëor. When I pass from these shores, Aravanthir will fall silent." Elanor had reached across the table without thinking, covering his hand with hers. "Then don't leave." "Not yet." He had looked at their joined hands for a long moment, then turned his palm up to lace his fingers with hers. "Perhaps," he said softly, "I have found a reason to stay." The moment had stretched between them, charged with something Elanor didn't dare name. Then Miriel had entered with more wine, and the spell broke. But after that night, things shifted. Thalionor stood closer during lessons, his hands lingering when he corrected her stance. She caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read when he thought she wasn't looking, and she found herself thinking of him at odd hours, remembering the curve of his rare smiles, the way starlight caught in his dark hair, the timbre of his voice when he spoke her name. On the 15th night, he took her to the Hall of Stars again. "There is a celebration tonight," he explained. "The rising of a star we name Arundel. It comes but once a year, and my people dance to honor it. I thought, perhaps you might join us." The hall was transformed. Dozens of elves filled the starlit space, all dressed in flowing garments that shimmered like captured light. Music filled the air, harps and flutes and voices singing in harmonies that made Eleanor's eyes sting with unshed tears of pure beauty. And they were dancing, not the formal, stilted dances of Greymoor's court, but something wild and joyous. Movements that seemed to capture the very essence of starlight. "I don't know how," Elanor protested as Thalionor drew her toward the dancers. "Then I'll teach you," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Trust me." And somehow, impossibly, she did. Thalionor led her through the steps with infinite patience, and the other elves made space for them, their ancient eyes warm rather than judgmental. Gradually, Elanor stopped thinking about the steps and simply moved, letting the music guide her. She was breathless and laughing when the dance ended, more alive than she'd ever felt in Greymoor's grey halls. Thalionor was looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch all over again. "You are beautiful when you smile," he said quietly, barely audible over the music. "Truly, radiantly beautiful." Elanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Your Highness, Thalionor," he corrected gently, "and I speak only truth. The Eldar do not lie, especially not about beauty. We have seen it in all its forms across the ages." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather light. "You glow, Elanor Ashfeld, not just with the Cëor-en-Edain, though that is awakening in you like sunrise. You glow with life itself, with spirit unbroken by cruelty. Do you know how rare that is? In 1200 years, I have met perhaps a dozen souls that burned as brightly as yours." They stood frozen in the center of the dancing elves, and Elanor felt the weight of something momentous hovering between them. But before either could speak, a disturbance rippled through the hall. Miriel appeared at Thalionor's elbow, her expression grave. "My prince, forgive the interruption. We have visitors at the gates from Greymoor." Thalionor's expression shuddered instantly, becoming cold and terrible. "How many?" 30 armed men, my lord, led by Lord Ashfeld himself. Elanor felt ice flood her veins. Her father was here. But why? He'd been eager to be rid of her. What could possibly bring him to Aravanthir? Thalionor's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You need not face him if you don't wish to." The offer surprised her. "Do I have a choice?" "In my halls always." His amber eyes blazed with protective fury. "You are under my protection. He cannot touch you here." Something in his fierce declaration gave Elanor strength. "No," she said, lifting her chin. "I'll face him. I'm not the daughter who trembled at his anger anymore." Pride flashed across Thalionor's features. "Then let us greet Lord Ashfeld together. Muriel, have them brought to the Hall of Judgment." The Hall of Judgment was aptly named. Unlike the soaring beauty of the Hall of Stars, this chamber was austere and imposing. White stone walls rose to a ceiling, crossed with ancient beams, carved with runes that glowed faintly. At one end stood a dais with a throne of living wood, and along the walls hung banners depicting the history of Aravanthir, battles won, treaties signed, ages passing. Thalionor sat upon the throne, and for the first time since Elanor had met him, he looked every inch the immortal prince. Power radiated from him like cold fire, and his amber eyes held the weight of centuries. He had donned formal robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars, and upon his brow sat a circlet of mithril that caught the light like captured moonbeams. Elanor stood to his right, one step below the throne, a position Muriel had quietly indicated meant honored guest under the prince's direct protection. Other elves lined the walls, silent as statues but radiating barely contained power. The doors opened, and Lord Gareth Ashfeld strode in, flanked by his knights. He looked diminished somehow in these soaring halls, his expensive furs shabby compared to elven silk, his weathered face haggard. His eyes darted around the chamber suspiciously, as if expecting ambush. When he saw Elanor standing beside the throne, not cowering, not chained, but dressed in fine elven cloth and looking healthier than she had in years, his expression contorted with confusion and something darker. Anger, perhaps, or fear. "Prince Thalionor," he said, executing a stiff bow that barely qualified as respectful. "I have come to inquire after my daughter." "Have you indeed?" Thalionor's voice was silk over steel, the musical quality of his accent making even the threat in his words sound beautiful. "How curious, Lord Ashfeld. When you sent her here, your letter explicitly stated that she was mine to dispose of as I saw fit. Those were your words, were they not?" Lord Gareth's face flushed. Circumstances have changed. I'm prepared to offer compensation for her return." "Father," Elanor spoke for the first time, her voice steady and clear. "What circumstances have changed?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Family matters. Your sister Rosalind's betrothal has fallen through. New arrangements must be made." Understanding hit Elanor like a physical blow. Lord Branwick had broken his engagement with Rosalind. Beautiful, perfect Rosalind. And now her father needed another daughter to barter away. With Elanor gone, he'd lost a piece on his political chessboard. "How unfortunate for Rosalind," Elanor said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "But I fail to see how that concerns me. You made it quite clear I was no longer your daughter when you sent me here as tribute. You will do as you're told." Lord Gareth snapped, his composure fracturing. "You belong to your family, to your bloodline. This creature may have charmed you somehow, but you're coming home. Now." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. Thalionor rose from his throne in one fluid motion, and though he was not a large man even by elven standards, he suddenly seemed to tower over everyone present. His eyes blazed like molten gold, and power crackled in the air around him. "You dare," he said softly, each word edged like a blade, "enter my halls under the ancient laws of hospitality and speak such insults? You dare claim ownership of a woman you sold like cattle?" Lord Gareth's hand moved to his sword hilt. Behind him, his knights tensed. "I dare demand what is mine by blood and law. She is my daughter, bound by the laws of men. She is a guest in my house," Thalionor interrupted, his voice rising for the first time Elanor had heard, echoing off the stone walls with preternatural force. "Protected by treaties older than your kingdom. The Tratado de Ithildin was broken the moment you offered human life as tribute. By the ancient accords, that gives me right of judgment." He descended the dais steps, each footfall ringing with finality. "You have a choice, Lord Gareth Ashfeld. Leave my lands now, peacefully, without your daughter, or test my patience further and discover why your grandfather feared to enter these mountains without invitation." For a terrible moment, Elanor thought her father might actually draw his weapon. Madness flickered in his eyes, the madness of a man whose plans were crumbling, whose control was slipping. Then he turned that venomous gaze on Elanor. "You always were a disappointment," he spat. "Now you're a traitor to your blood as well. When this creature tires of you, don't come crawling back to Greymoor." Something inside Elanor snapped. Not broke, transformed. The anger she'd suppressed for 19 years, the hurt from countless barbs and casual cruelties, the rejection that had defined her existence, all of it crystallized into something bright and burning. Heat flooded through her body, and the torches lining the hall exploded into pillars of silver flame. The air crackled with energy, and Elanor felt power surge from somewhere deep in her core, rushing through her veins like liquid starlight. "My blood," she heard herself say, her voice resonating with harmonics that weren't quite human, "is exactly what this is about, Father. Its true nature, its true power." Light emanated from her skin, silver and gold intertwined, and she felt rather than saw the elves along the walls draw back in awe. The Cëor-en-Edain, dormant for 19 years, was awakening in full. "You sensed it," she continued, taking a step toward her father, who scrambled backward. "Didn't you? On some level you always knew I was different. That's why you hated me. Not because I was fat or bookish or questioning, because I reminded you of something your kind lost, something your blood remembered but couldn't name." The flames grew higher, casting her shadow huge against the walls. She could feel the life in everything around her, the ancient wood of the throne, the growing things in the gardens beyond, the very stone of the mountains. All of it sang to her, and she could sing back. "Enough!" Thalionor's voice cut through the building storm. His hand on her shoulder was cool and grounding, pulling her back from the edge of something vast and terrifying. The flames subsided to normal height, and the light fading from Eleanor's skin left her trembling. The prince turned back to Lord Gareth, who stood pale and shaking. "You see what you discarded, mortal lord? The Cëor-en-Edain walks in her, the bridge between our peoples, lost for 1,000 years. His voice dropped to something deadly soft. "Leave, now, before my patience expires completely, and I demonstrate why your ancestors signed the Tratado de Ithildin in the first place." Lord Gareth needed no further encouragement. He and his men fled the hall, their footsteps echoing away into silence. When they were gone, Eleanor's legs gave way. Thalionor caught her before she could fall, lifting her easily into his arms. "Steady," he murmured. "The first true awakening is always overwhelming." What did I do?" Elanor gasped, her head spinning. "You manifested your power in response to threat and emotion. Instinctive, uncontrolled, but magnificent." He was carrying her from the hall, and distantly Elanor was aware of elves bowing as they passed. "You could have killed them all, had you wished it." The flames answered your rage. "I didn't want to kill anyone," she protested weakly. "I know, that's why you stopped." They had reached her chambers somehow. Thalionor set her gently on the bed, brushing hair back from her face with infinite gentleness. "Rest now. Your body needs time to adjust." "Don't leave," Elanor heard herself say. She caught his hand. "Please, I don't want to be alone." Something profound shifted in Thalionor's expression. He sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her hand. "Then I will stay." She fell asleep like that, his cool hand clasped in hers, amber eyes watching over her in the darkness. Elanor woke to early morning light and found Thalionor still sitting beside her bed, though he'd moved to a chair at some point. He wasn't sleeping. Elves didn't sleep as mortals did, but his eyes were distant, lost in memories or thoughts she couldn't guess. "How long did you stay?" she asked softly. He focused on her, and a slight smile touched his lips. "All night. I said I would. Don't elves need rest? We enter reverie, a waking dream where we revisit memories. But I found watching over you more compelling." He rose and moved to the windows. "Your father has left Aravanthir. His party was seen descending the mountain paths at dawn." Elanor sat up slowly, testing her body. She felt different, lighter somehow, as if something that had weighed her down for years had burned away in last night's fire. "What happens now?" "That depends." Thalionor turned from the window, backlit by the rising sun so his dark hair seemed haloed in gold. "Our bargain was for 30 days. 23 have passed. You could still leave when the time comes. Go anywhere in the mortal lands with wealth enough to live as you please. Is that what you want?" The question emerged before Elanor could stop it. Thalionor crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her bed so they were eye level. "No," he said simply. "It is not what I want." Not even slightly. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Then what do you want? You, he said, and the word held 12 centuries of loneliness, of watching the world change while he remained static, of beauty that meant nothing without someone to share it. I want you to stay, not as a guest, not as a student, but as... He hesitated, and for the first time looked uncertain. As my equal, my companion. Perhaps if you were willing, something more. I'm mortal, Elanor whispered. I'll age and die while you remain unchanged. Isn't that what you said you feared? Yes. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. And for 1100 years, that fear kept me from forming attachments to your kind. But you, Elanor, he shook his head, a wondering smile crossing his features. You made me forget to be afraid. You made me feel alive again. And I would rather have 50 mortal years with you than another 1,000 years of beautiful, empty immortality. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. In Greymore, I was told I was too much, too large, too loud, too strange. Here, you make me feel like I'm not enough. Not enough time, not enough years to give you. You are everything, Thalionor interrupted fiercely. Your mortality isn't a flaw, Elanor. It's a gift. Every moment with you is precious because it's finite. Every smile, every laugh, every sunrise we watch together matters because there won't be infinite others. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. The Eldar have a saying, it's better to burn bright and brief than to fade slowly into shadow. You burn so brightly, Elanor Ashfeld. You've reignited something in me I thought long dead. What about the Cëor-en-Edain? Elanor asked. Is that why you... The ancient blood brought you to my attention, Thalionor admitted. But everything else, your courage, your kindness despite cruelty, your brilliant mind, the way you see wonder in small things I'd long stopped noticing, that is why I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, impossibly heavy and impossibly light at once. Say that again, Elanor whispered. Thalionor smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I love you, Elanor. I, who have lived through the rise and fall of kingdoms, who have seen the very stars change their courses. I love you with an intensity that terrifies me. Elanor didn't remember closing the distance between them, but suddenly her hands were in his hair and his arms were around her waist, and they were kissing with desperate, consuming passion. He tasted of starlight and eternity, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you too, Elanor gasped against his lips. I think I started falling that first night in the Hall of Stars, when you looked at me and actually saw me. They stayed like that, foreheads touching, holding each other as sunrise painted the mountains gold. Eventually, Thalionor pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious. There is something more you should know, he said. The Cëor-en-Edain was lost because the last bearers died without passing on their gifts. But you, if you stay, if we work together, we could search for others, restore what was lost, build bridges between elves and humans again. A purpose, Elanor murmured.